All right. Okay. So a couple of quick announcements for you, just to kind of remind you, your next exam is on Monday. I have a study guide that is prepared for you. Ideally, we are going to make it through judgment and part of decision making. So I have already put the notes up for judgment. And just so you know, I did something I normally don't do. I gave you full notes. So you don't have to write anything down unless you want to write down additional details. So hopefully you'll feel pretty comfortable with that. And just a couple of other things to remind you of over the coming weeks. Your next writing assignment isn't due until December 5th. I know you thought that by me mentioning it that it was closer. No, it's December 5th. And then additionally, that last week of classes, we are going to have our video projects. So hopefully you've been meeting with your groups or figuring out who your groups are and you've been working on them. If you haven't, I would say probably start to do some stuff before Thanksgiving, because once we come back from Thanksgiving, we got 2 weeks and we're out. So try to see if you can make a meeting with your group next week. So at the very least, you can start focusing on scripting. And I would say, email me with any questions you have. You know, I'm happy to help you out, but I can't film your video for you. All right. Does anybody have any questions before we continue our discussion of problem solving? All right, let's go. Okay. So the last time that we were here, we were kind of talking about the importance of incubation and the general problem solver. So the last time we were here, we were talking about the general problem solver. Remember that this was developed by Newell and Simon as a means to develop a computer program that works only on well-defined problems. So again, a well-defined problem is a situation where we know our initial state, we know our goal state, but the way to get to those goals, and we also have our strategies. So we have initial state, goal state, and possible strategies in that well-defined problem. And in problem solving, Newell and Simon identified 2 different heuristics that we tend to use when we are engaging in problem solving. So first of all, we have what is called hill climbing. So hill climbing is basically the idea that every single decision that you make towards solving the problem, it's designed to get you closer to the goal. So going back to the Tower of Hanoi, hill climbing basically kind of looks like this. Every disc is going to get me closer and closer to the problem. But hopefully you've noticed an issue with hill climbing. And I kind of showed you this analogy of a dog with a bone. And it's also true here in this puzzle. Sometimes you are going to have to make a backward step, or what feels like a backward step. So sometimes, let's say that I'm putting this disc right here and the disc below it right here. At some point, for me to get that other disc, I'm going to have to move one of those other 2 discs out of the way, because you cannot put a larger disc on top of a smaller disc. That is not a permissible move. So whatever move you make, you might have to backtrack. And hill climbing generally does not permit backtracking. So very similarly, the dog wants to get to this bone, and at this point, if we're using hill climbing, it's going to want to try to move through the fence, because that is getting it closer to the goal. The problem is you actually have to move away from the bone so that you can walk through the fence and actually get to it. Hill climbing is a bad strategy, because sometimes you have to backtrack. Sometimes you have to move farther away from your goal to ultimately get what you want in the bigger picture. Now, on the other hand, we have means end analysis. So means end analysis is a little bit different from hill climbing, because unlike hill climbing, you can actually backward track if you need to. But what's more important is that you are basically forming a sub-goal. So if I'm trying to take a flight from Kansas City to New York and my flight is canceled, I need to figure out a new goal, because I'm very far from the goal that I need. So what you're basically going to do is form a sub-goal that is designed to reduce those differences in some way. So maybe I had a direct flight that was canceled. So here's the thing, with means end analysis, sometimes I might need to backtrack to actually get closer to my goal, and that's okay. So for example, maybe I have a connecting flight in Denver that will put me onto a direct flight to New York. Now, technically, that is temporarily taking me further from New York, but it is in fact getting me closer to the goal because it's getting me to that next flight. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to find a sub goal that reduces those differences. Then once you've met that sub goal, you are going to again note your current state and your goal, and you're basically going to make sub goals until you actually reach the goal. So if I gave you an exam question that asked you to kind of note the differences between hill climbing and a means end analysis, do you feel like you'd be pretty capable of doing it? Maybe? Does anybody want more clarification? Any? Okay, everybody's good then. Okay, so my question is the general problem solver a good model for what we do? Sure, if you want to talk about well-defined problems, but guess what? Most of our problems are ill-defined. Additionally, a lot of human beings solve problems on the basis of insight, and the GPS provides absolutely no information about how insight works in this framework. Additionally, one thing that is critical here is that the GPS is going to specify the shortest possible sequence. You and I do not always have the shortest possible sequence for problem solving. We'll make mistakes, we mess up. So it only specifies the shortest possible sequence. Additionally, because it does have a limited short-term memory and access to long-term memory, it generally can remember prior steps pretty well, but it's generally bad at planning. So it's capable of looking backward, but unlike you and I, it can't really look forward very well. And I'm not saying that we always do the best job of looking forward, but we do have ideas of where we want to be. And that's going to be harder for a computer with that kind of infrastructure, at least back in 1960, to be able to do. Okay. Sorry, this is the first one I've had today. I don't even know why I'm apologizing for it. I shall not. All right. Anybody need some more time here? Thanks, Ashton. Dharma, do you really like Halloween?
Yes, and also the shirt is very, very soft.
Oh, very cool. I like soft things. I will tell you, I just bought a Christmas sweater for Amazon for the faculty potluck, and I might wear it before the faculty potluck. It's just a green snowflake sweater that says Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. And a happy new, I was hoping it'd say in a happy new year on the back. It does not. Oh, well.
Or one of those fabric.
Why would I ruin a sweater?
Well,
I'm not doing that. I'm not very talented with the paint pens. I've tried. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the problem of transfer. So if you've learned to solve a problem a certain way, how much does that carry over to other similar problems? So here's an example. Are there things that you are currently learning in this class that you can carry over into your other classes? How many of you are actually using them? Good deal. I like to hear that. How many of you have learned things in other classes that have carried over to additional classes, even if they didn't look like they were related to each other? Cool. In those cases, you are engaging in a process known as transfer. What you have learned carries over into new situations. So transfer is basically you using your previous experience from solving a problem to help us solve a similar problem. Now, sometimes this is referred to as positive transfer. So our prior experiences help us get better at solving new similar problems. But sometimes we do find that previous experience can actually hurt our problem solving. And this is what is referred to as negative transfer. So positive means it facilitates, previous experience facilitates. Negative transfer is basically previous experience inhibits our ability to solve a problem well. So we are going to talk about two other types of transfer here. So you could potentially think of something like functional fixedness as a type of negative transfer. Your previous experience makes it hard for you to basically see anything but a box of tacks as nothing more than a box of tacks. Okay, I will let you write this down. I know it's post-lunch. I'm sorry. Was lunch good today? Kind of, maybe. You're like, no. Ashton disagree. What was wrong with it? It just wasn't good. Oh, that's right. We do have a DoorDash here, don't we? It's all right. Everybody good here? So we have something very similar. So some other types of transfer that we have are what are known as, far transfer and near transfer. So ideally, the information that you learn in this class, such as how to study or things like that, should facilitate learning outside of the classroom, even in topics that are not similar. So far transfer means that this information carries over to something that is very dissimilar from what we are looking at. But I will say that most studies that look at transfer of learning often tend to focus on near transfer. So looking at similar tasks, similar sorts of problems, and things like that. So I'll give you an example. How many of you and this was a lot more common maybe about 10 years ago than it is today. How many of you are familiar with different types of brain training programs? Maybe you have a copy of Big Brain Academy somewhere. I have Big Brain Academy at my house. It's a video game for the Wii. And my partner got it for me for Christmas, like as a used copy, and we tried to play it. And I was much, much better than him. And he was like, I don't like this anymore. You keep winning. So we don't play it anymore. I think it makes him feel bad. But brain training programs were often a really big one that was really popular maybe about 10 years ago when I came here was Lumosity. It was Lumosity. And it's basically this idea that by engaging in these brain training programs, you could potentially stave off some of the deficits that happen with older age, and that it would generally carry over across a variety of tasks. Now, what sorts of tasks were they actually doing in Lumosity? So I actually did sign up for a free trial once to actually see what the tasks were. So something that I didn't talk about, but actually popped up as one of your options in our last multiple choice test was something called the NVAC task. It is sometimes taken as a task of working memory, but it's actually kind of complicated. And Lumosity did this with trains. So you would have like a picture of a train station, And it would basically be wanting you to see if the current train that came out matched what you saw 2 trains before. So you'd have to go in your mind 2 back to basically make sure that they matched. So I could have an orange train come out, a purple train come out, a blue train come out. And at that point, I have to say, no, that wasn't a match because the first one that I got was orange. So then you'd have to remember that that blue train came out. You could get rid of that first orange one. The next one that comes out is a purple train. You say, yes, that's what I saw 2 trains ago. Next one that comes out is a green train. So you constantly have to keep updating and keeping track of what came 2 items before. And so those were the kind of tasks that they were doing in Lumosity. Now, here's what we know. A lot of these brain training programs will tell you that what they are doing is they're trying to increase your intelligence, your reasoning ability. They are trying to, some people will even tell you that it can raise your IQ a couple of points. That is all basically claiming that there's FAR transfer. Here's the problem with brain training programs. They do not create FAR transfer. They just get you really good at the tasks that they train you on. So they have no FAR transfer, but they do have a lot of near transfer. So people were doing research on all of these brain training programs, and it turns out they just make you good at the tasks they test you on. What a shock. So there's no FAR transfer, but there's a lot of near transfer. Now, ideally, we want FAR transfer when it comes to problem solving. So there are 3 different dimensions of transfer that we have to kind of focus on. So first of all, when we're trying to see if something transfers well, we need to see if it's similar to the task that we were previously trained on. That doesn't just include the superficial features, it also includes the underlying structure of the task. So the NBAC task that Lumosity did with those trains, that's just one way to do the task. You know how I've done the NBAC task? You look at numbers on a screen and you have to keep track of what number was 2 items back. So that has the same underlying structure, but different superficial features compared to the train task. In addition to task similarity, we're going to be looking at context similarity. Are we in the same location? Are we in the same social context? And we also have to think about the time interval. That is the period of time that we have between the previous problems that we've solved and the current problems that we want that information to transfer to. And we find that in general, transfer is greatest when task similarity and context similarity are very high and the time interval is very short. Enjoy the warm, stuffy building. In about 2 days, it's going to feel like December. I promised the research method students they'd get to see my horrifying fuzzy pink coat. I've been told it looks like a bathrobe. Have you seen the coat?
I think so.
Okay, I love that coat. What's wrong with that coat?
It was you.
I think you're giving me a lot of grace and you didn't actually think it was that cute. It's very fuzzy. It has a lot of texture. Me too.
Does it look like a Thneed?
It does not look like a Thneed, but I do actually have an American Eagle sweater that very much does look like a Thneed, and I'll probably wear that on Friday because it's fuzzy and warm.
You should wear it on February 2nd.
I'm not going to remember that. That's next year. Remind me in biopsych, okay?
Okay.
Or research methods, seeing as you're in both of them.
You just can't get rid of me.
Yeah, but that's not a problem. I don't want to get rid of students. I want you to stay forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. No, I want you to graduate. I want you to do awesome things, but I want you to come back sometimes. It gets lonely. All right, everybody good here? All right, don't write this down. Let's talk a little bit about FAR transfer. So let's see if you know how to solve this problem. So in a village by a river, a chief guards a sacred stone statue. Every year, the chief goes downriver to the next village to collect taxes. There, he places the statue in a tub at one end of a hanging balance. To pay taxes, villagers fill the tub on the other end of the scale with gold until the statue is balanced. This year, the chief forgot to bring his balance scale. How can he figure out how much gold to collect to match the statue's weight? Does anybody have an idea? Ashton.
Fill a bucket with water, put the statue in the water, and then take it out, and then fill the bucket with as much water as it takes to fill it. Not water, gold as much.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, what you're actually gonna do, you're gonna put the tub in the water. You're gonna put the statue in the tub and see where the water level is on the outside of the tub, but that's close. You're basically focusing on how much water is displaced by the statue. Now, how many of you would have figured that out? You're like, I would have eventually. Okay, but yeah, that's exactly the right answer. So we're gonna basically put the statue in the tub, put it in the water, make a marking on the outside or the inside of the tub where the water displaces, where the water rises, and then basically fill up the gold until we get that mark again. So we're going to focus on that water displacement. So here's what's really interesting. This is a case where task similarity is really important. Chen and colleagues actually looked at this with Chinese participants and American participants. And here's why this is really important. The way to solve the problem that Ashton mentioned is actually a part of a very well-known Chinese folktale. So a lot of people in China know this story. On the other hand, you and I probably do not have those folktales. We usually have like people putting their feet in glass shoes and people picking up swords from lakes. Huh? What now? From Iraq. Well, it could be from Iraq, but the sword also came from a lake.
Came from a lady.
In the lake. That's it. There we go. Okay, sorry, it's been a while since I watched Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Can you tell?
I think there's two swords and both of them came from different places.
Supreme executive power. Sorry, I was about to do the little line from the movie, but so this is a pretty well-known folktale in China. So what a surprise. This has some task similarity. 69% of the Chinese participants solved the problem compared to 8% of Americans. Now, Chen basically said that there are 3 different stages related to FAR transfer. So first, what we have to do is access the similar task. So we have to access that previous task that we've done to note its similarity. Then we're going to engage in mapping the different components together so that we can obtain the solution to the new problem based on the similar problem that we've already solved. So we're going to map those 2 problems onto each other and focus on how to solve the problem based on those similarities. And once we have the solution based on that mapping, we are then going to execute the solution. Don't worry, we're going to get more funky word problems here. None of them involve math. These are not like fun riddles. These are like, this makes my brain hurt riddle. Okay, all right. See, that's why I like puns. They're kind of like riddles, but with a lot less effort. All right, so in addition to task similarity, researchers have also looked at context similarity either having participants solve some problems in a laboratory or solve other ones in a classroom. What a shock that context matters, that encoding specificity, again, kind of playing a role here. We do find that there's more transfer when the location stays the same. So if you solved a previous problem in a laboratory, you're going to have an easier time with other problems in the laboratory. Additionally, with the role of time interval, researchers studied children to see if they could transfer strategies for hypothesis testing. And they basically found that shorter time intervals are going to be better for transfer. So again, transfer is best when similarity is high, context similarity is high, and the time interval is short.
Study sessions the day before the exam, you ask us questions similar to that on the exam, so that we have that high context and high association so we can transfer.
I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, that's probably what I'm doing. I just wanted to help y'all out. And I do it the night before because I don't want to work. I want you to work through the problems on your own and answer the questions on your own as much as possible. And basically by waiting until the last possible minute to do the review session, first of all, I'm keeping it pretty fresh in your mind, provided you aren't studying for other things. And I can answer any of the questions that you had trouble searching for. So it was not done with a scientific intent. It was more, this is a good thing to do and I don't have a lot of time in my schedule. So let's just do it the night before the exam so that everybody feels comfortable and people are happy when they take the test instead of scared and terrified and running around like SpongeBob, basically burning all the files. All right. Anybody need some more time here? Okay, Manuela, take your time. So I will tell you that depending on how we do on Friday, I have taught some of this before and recorded it, so I may share recordings with you to watch. Listen to me at 1.25. I talk faster and I sound like I flow a lot better and I don't take long pauses. Okay. So here's another problem for you. Don't write, Manuela, did you need more time? Okay, great. All right, so here's another problem solving opportunity. So doctor wanted to operate on a tumor. He wanted to use a laser, not use laser, use a laser to eliminate all the affected cells, and he had to make sure he got them all. However, the laser beam could also damage adjacent cells. The tumor was large and had to be taken out all in one operation, though the continuous use of the laser was bound to affect healthy tissues as well. What could the doctor do? Does anybody have any thoughts? Ashton, you want to go for it?
Surgically remove the tumor first and get as much of it out without using the laser.
You got to use the laser. Sorry. Only the laser. You can only use the laser. Sarah.
After you get it out with the laser, you take a skin graft and then you put it over so that it can take from the healthy skin.
Too complicated. Yeah, Hannah.
If you, by continuous use, is it like the length of time that's affecting the healthy tissue?
It could be, or how long you fire at the same space.
So if you worked faster, would that?
I tell you what, we seem like we're stuck here, so I'm going to tell you another story. Okay. So a general wanted to capture a castle. The castle was equipped with cannons and could easily target any advances and blow up armies at ease. The more concentrated the army, the worse the problem. I apologize for my terrible spelling. The general knew that the best way to capture the castle was to accumulate all his resources and attack it in a single operation, though he was afraid that any concentration of this force will be faced with lethal cannons. He didn't want to risk his soldiers so soon in the invasion and allow them to get demotivated before even reaching the castle walls. Does anybody know how to solve the tumor problem? Do we need one more hint? Sarah, you want to give it a go?
Focus on the center of the tumor.
How so?
So like, if it goes out and affects all the stuff, you focus the laser on the center of the tumor and remove it like that. If
How would you move the laser?
you're like in a little spiral type thing.
Not quite a spiral, but you're not far off. Okay, so one more hint. So we're still talking about the general problem. One day, it suddenly occurred to him what he needed to do. He decided that instead of sending his entire army in one operation and risk fatalities, he could divide his army into battalions and send them as smaller waves after one another. Now, the cannons couldn't reach all of them as the invasion force was not as concentrated as before, but they could still all accumulate on the castle walls and put pressure on the enemy. Indeed, he carried out his plan and captured the castle in record time with minimum casualties. How do you solve the tumor problem?
You shoot at the edges.
You circle. You circle with a very low amount. You don't use the full concentration. You use a very small amount of laser and you circle around to remove the tumor. Did this story kind of help? Maybe. So it turns out when you do this, when you use the general story to help you figure out the tumor story, that is a case where we are basically transferring solving problems by analogy. You need, and here's the thing, for an analogy to be able to work, you have to notice the similarities between the two problems. Hopefully you are starting to kind of catch on to that. But here's what we find. In a control group, most people never solve the tumor problem. Even if they potentially get a general story or a different story, they don't solve the problem. Now, here's what's really critical. There's a small percentage of people that get the general story that never solve the problem. But if you give them the general story, a certain percentage solves it. And if those people don't get it, eventually with the hint, how the general solved the problem, most people will be able to figure out how to solve this problem. So basically, with the laser, you use small concentrations, just circle around and basically remove the tumor. Just like with the army, you send smaller concentrations of men around the castle to basically overwhelm the other army. So in general, analogical reasoning, if you're able to notice the similarities between the two problems and use that hint to execute the solution, in general, you're going to have better odds of being able to solve that problem. So this was originally done by Gick and Holyoake in 1980. So research on transfer has typically focused on analogical problem solving like these. So you have to use the similarities between the problems to be able to solve the current problem. Now, to successfully solve, as I've mentioned, what's critical here is that you have to notice the similarities between the previous problem and the current problem. So for example, if you heard that general story and didn't think that it related to the tumor story at all, you're never going to be able to solve the problem if you can't spot the similarities. Now, some people might be turned away by the fact that the story covers two completely different things. The superficial similarity is not there. But the way to solve the problem and the underlying structure of the problem are similar, even if the story that we're telling is not similar. Like really, on the face of it, a general story with this army doesn't sound at all like removing a tumor, but they have the same underlying structural components, and they have the same way to solve that problem. Right. Anybody need some more time here? Okay. So there are 3 different types of problem-solving similarities, and I've already kind of alluded to them, but your book talks about them as well. So we have our superficial similarity. And this is basically random details that are irrelevant to actually solving either problem. So basically, one being a story focused on the doctor, one being a story focused on a general with an army. There's not a lot of superficial similarity there. We can also have what is called a structural similarity. And that is basically the 2 problems both have the same underlying causal relationships. So in both of these cases, the story involves having a very powerful force that you do not want to concentrate, but having something that needs to be dealt with and removed. But you can't use too much force. And then finally, we have procedural similarity. This is basically the procedures for the solution are similar. And in both cases, not only does the general story and the tumor story have structural similarity, it also has procedural similarity because the way to solve the problem is the same. So not only do we have structural similarity and that the causal relationships are the same, we have underlying procedural similarity. So kind of looking at this, you would think that superficial similarity doesn't matter, but it turns out that it does. It turns out Keene back in 1987 actually found that you're a lot more likely to use an analogy if it has some superficial similarity. So part of the reason that you may not have noticed the connection between the 2 stories is because they look really different on the face of it. So generally, you're a lot more likely to use an analogy if it has superficial similarity to the tumor problem than if it had that underlying structural similarity like the general does. So sometimes just because something is superficial, it doesn't mean it's bad. It might actually help people make that connection much more easily. Yeah.
Analogy in real life, like it would be everyday problem or something like that.
How many of you have figured out to solve a problem one way and have used that to solve a similar problem? Anybody have any examples? This is definitely a case where this doesn't look a lot like what we do in everyday life. You're generally not going to get problems like these in everyday life. So transfer is going to look really different here. Yeah, Sarah.
I mean, a real life example I can think of is over the summer I was at a camp for children with developmental disabilities. And I would use a lot of the habits that I utilize at home for my siblings who have developmental disabilities.
Okay.
That weren't necessarily in the training,
Mhm.
but it worked all the same. So like
Mhm.
taking a step back and letting a kid like take a few steps away
Mhm.
from me instead of covering over them so that they could
Mhm.
like reset their
Mhm.
senses.
Mhm.
I
Yep.
use that, and I don't know if that's transferred.
Oh, I think it is transfer. I think that's a lot of superficial similarity, though, just on the face of it, when you're dealing with kids that require disability accommodations, both at home and at camp, there's going to be a lot of similarity there. The only other thing I can think of is that, well, I'm kind of in a middle management position right now. And one of the things that has occasionally helped, and I'm not speaking poorly about my colleagues in any sort of way. I wouldn't do that. I love them very much. But sometimes managing them is like managing a college classroom full of college students. Everybody has different ideas. Not everybody knows why they want to be there or why they need to be at this meeting. And, sometimes that's how it is. So that could be a case where a lot of the strategies that I use in the classroom may potentially be carried over into other situations with colleagues. So that's another possibility. Yes.
This isn't something that I have done, but it's something that I've seen.
Uh-huh.
People who are adopting gentle parenting for their children, will sometimes use it to deal with their parents.
Hmm.
I do that with my grandpa.
You do that with your grandfather?
Yes, and it makes him so mad. I get so mad at him, like demeaning me. So
Uh-huh.
I gentle parent him and he. But then we eventually get to the point where he finally just like breaks down. He's just like, fine. And he gives in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, I don't know that much about gentle parenting. I grew up in a very authoritarian single parent household, so I probably could have used some of that occasionally. Maybe I'd be less of a perfectionist, who knows? All right. Okay. Now, why isn't there better spontaneous use? And I already kind of brought this up. Superficial similarity is really what helps us notice the connections. It's a way to get our foot in the door so that we can see the underlying connections beneath the surface of the problem. Additionally, semantic closeness really matters. So you're a lot more likely to solve the problem if the analogy is semantically close. So for example, in my cognitive psych class, when I first learned about this problem, I did not get the general story. I was told a similar story about a surgeon using X-rays to basically fight a cancer. And that actually made the problem a lot easier to solve because first of all, there's more superficial similarity there and there is a semantic closeness. So you're able to make that connection a bit more easily. We're dealing with a medical issue in both instances. Now, I will mention that superficial similarity is more important when people are giving you problems. If you are asked to generate analogies for problems, you rely far less on superficial similarity. It's not time to go yet. Oh, I am sorry, computer, made you rise again. Aw. It's one of the reasons that I actually kind of miss having a Mac is because that just ding, it's back. Great. Does anybody need some more time? Oh, sorry. Did you have your hand up, Emanuela? Okay, I couldn't tell. All right, so how do we improve analogical reasoning? So first of all, it's a lot easier to grasp the problem structure if you encourage people to directly compare to a similar problem with the same underlying structure. So when you are actually given the radiation problem for cancer with the X-rays, and you're given the tumor problem with the laser, participants who are actually prompted to compare the two different problems and their analogies together are a lot more likely to obtain the solution. You can't just randomly notice that there's a difference. You have to actually be forced to compare between the two.
I'm like really hot, like I'm just drenched in sweat.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's stuffy in here. Like, how do you think I feel? I got like my polyester jersey on. I got a t-shirt on under that, and I'm wearing socks and boots. I definitely like being warm and my office is cold. This classroom is not. But thanks for sticking it out. I know the heat is not ideal, but don't worry, by Friday, you're going to be freezing in here and we'll all be wearing coats. Except for some of you who are brave and are not me. All right, I got my hands up. I'm not touching the keyboard yet until everybody's done. I'm not touching. Okay. How about one more slide and we call it a day? Okay, so here are some other major processes involved in analogical reasoning. So first of all, we know that working memory is kind of critical here. Researchers have actually looked at the role of selective interference in verbal versus pictorial analogies. So working memory is kind of critical here. So what we find is that for verbal analogies, that is going to be disrupted if we also have a task that taps the phonological loop. In the case of pictorial analogies, we're going to have a similar sort of issue, particularly for the pictorial analogies. Additionally, for you to be able to solve the problem, you might have to engage in a little bit of inhibition. Your instinct is to basically discount the problems because they don't look similar. You're going to have to engage in some inhibition of that idea. And we know that the frontal lobe is very strongly involved in that analogical reasoning process. So we are almost done. I think we talk about expertise next. And that'll be pretty quick on Friday. We'll start talking about judgment and decision making. All right, and when you're done, you can go. Bye.